IEEE Digital Census Initiative session. We will be talking about standardization needs and efforts in VR and AR. So regarding this session, the purpose of this session is to discuss, as we know, standardization is a key to growing markets and healthy ecosystems in many industries. And we will be discuss what need to be standardized or are being standardized in today's virtual reality and augmented reality industry, and what outcome can be expected from these standards activities, and how can they change the industry. And we will also give you the latest update in the regarding the standards activities overseen by IEEE Digital Census Initiative. So today we have 3 panelists, including myself, and we have Rudi Schubert, who is the director of new initiatives of IEEE Standards Association. We have Philip Rosedale, who is the founder and the CEO of High Fidelity. We were supposed to have another speaker, who is John Simmons from EPRI, but unfortunately, due to some extreme weather, his flight was delayed. His flight from Houston to Las Vegas was delayed several times and eventually was canceled, so he could not make it. So today we have totally 3 panelists. So our first speaker is Rudi Schubert. He is a director of new initiatives for Standards Association, focusing on incubation of emerging technology standards and the productive implementation of IEEE standards to accelerate technology adoption. He leads the IEEE Industry Connections Program, operating consensus building interest group across a portfolio of topics including AR, ethics for autonomous systems, IoT, big data, 3D body processing, and many others. And he also spent nearly 20 years in progressively expanding leadership roles with many other companies. So welcome, Rudi.
Okay, thanks, you. I will preface my discussion by saying that I only found out that I was presenting about an hour and a half ago. One of my colleagues from New Jersey had something come up, was not able to come out here, so I'm working off of his slide deck, and hopefully I can work through it fairly well. I'll also inject a bit of information the way I usually present some of the work that we're doing, things within the Standards Association. I mentioned to you also that unfortunate that John Simmons couldn't join us, but I am working closely with him, so I'll try to add a little information, some of what he probably would have said had his flight not got canceled. So I'll try to cover that as best I can as well. So in general, what I'm going to speak about is really looking at standards opportunities around mixed reality. And it's an area that the IEEE Standards Association has been involved with for some time. Going back 4 or 5 years was really the first work that we began to do in the virtual reality and augmented reality space. And now I'm going to see if I can play this embedded video that's in here. As much as we were doing the work, let's see if this works. Uh-oh, it's not. Continue, yes. Oh, I think there we go. All right, so I was going to say that until this past year, oh, is it come up? Anybody hear that?
Played yet? I feel like Ash on the first day of his Pokemon adventure, when he slept in and he was late. I feel like I'm late for my Pokemon adventure right now.
We'll start that over again.
Adventure, when he slept in and he was late.
Nope.
I feel like I'm late for my Pokemon adventure right now. What's up, guys? I'm sure you guys know that the game's out. It's out. Today's the day.
And guess who's lucky enough to download it? We are.
These
That's right.
guys.
So we're gonna take you on the beginning journey. Let's start this.
Yep. Since this is day one, and I'm sure everyone has questions, we're all starting in the same place. We're gonna go ahead and walk you guys through it.
So all the mistakes that we make.
All right, so I'm not going to go through this because I just noticed that he sent me the wrong clip in here, which is 27 minutes long. So I don't think we're going to do a 27-minute version of this. So let me just kill this and talk about it a bit. All right, you have to get back to where you were. PowerPoint. All right. So I'll keep talking. Yeah, so the video clip that he had meant to embed there was really, highlighting how, this in the past year or so when Pokemon came out, despite all the work that had been going on through, the community of folks working on augmented reality, virtual reality, despite work that goes on within the IEEE and different parts of IEEE, including the Standards Association, the general public was not nearly as aware of some of the things that were going on until this, kind of relatively simplistic game came out, and which really only scratches the surface of a lot of things that we've been talking about within IEEE when it comes to mixed reality issues. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot going on, and I think it's, very often it's behind the scenes within IEEE, depending on which particular areas that you get involved with, you may see different things. Certainly all of you are associated with the Consumer Electronics Society, which is part of IEEE technical activities. And also within technical activities, there's a Future Directions organization led by Bill, who's sitting up here in the front. And they're really looking at a lot of different emerging technology issues. We do a similar thing within the Standards Association, looking at what are the next generation standards that are coming out? What are the new emerging technology areas where standards are going to eventually be needed? Very often when it's a larger IEEE initiative, like areas that you see on the right side, whether it's rebooting computing, IEEE big data, or the IEEE digital senses, we collaborate across with Future Directions, with the different societies that are involved, to look at the standards aspects and really start to lay the groundwork for the future of standards in a particular area. So if we think about some of the work that's been going on in the augmented and mixed reality work area, one of the first things, and I'm not going to read through this list in its entirety, but there's been some road mapping work that's gone on looking at where augmented reality is going. And tied to that third bullet there talks a little bit about the smart glasses roadmap. The Standards Association has been a regular participant at Augmented World Expo and some of the other larger industry conferences, and has been doing some work to say, what are the barriers to adoption? We've been seeing things, from even if you're at the CES on the exhibit floor, you see a lot of different exhibits talking about whether it's AR glasses, whether it's full virtual reality type of devices, and currently they're starting to coalesce, but very often it's been a lot of siloed activities. Systems are not necessarily interoperable. So we'd actually been pulling together interest groups of people who get together to talk about where do we see this going, what's keeping it from widespread adoption, what are some of the actions that can be taken. So some of these reports and these roadmap type of things that we've put together are taking a look at that and trying to create more of an actionable plan to try to accelerate the adoption of these technologies and put in place standards or other things that might be necessary to help support that. Additional areas where we've been looking, smart materials is another area that's been growing. And that's another area where it really ranges. You could be looking at materials, whether it's the plastics aspects that get into AR, VR devices, right through to materials and wearables, and not only how these different smart materials are developed, but the communications aspects that are involved with them as well. I mean, certainly with wearables, there's the whole wireless communication aspect, which ties in quite well with some of the work that IEEE has done. As a leader in wireless communications with our IEEE 802 with Wi-Fi and the different flavors of wireless communications. So quite a bit of really looking cross-disciplinary aspects of smart materials. We have one there, it's called retail therapy, and there's another one on treating post-traumatic stress disorder with virtual reality. We actually have a panel tomorrow that's going to delve into that a bit more. Jay Iorio is down here in the audience today, and he's been leading our virtual reality efforts within the Standards Association. So I'm not going to say too much about that, but hopefully you'll be able to attend that panel tomorrow, and Jay can certainly give you all the details on the work that's been taking place there. I did want to touch a little bit on the smart utility tools, because I think this is something that, had John Simmons been able to join us this morning, John would have talked about that. We have a program that is looking at the use of augmented reality in the oil, gas, and electric areas. And a lot of that has to do with kind of maintenance, job aids. John, being a part of the Electric Power Research Institute, is working on behalf of all the large utilities, the electric power utilities, at looking at what can they do for their field force workers and using augmented reality as a tool. And again, what are the barriers? What are the standards that are actually needed? So I know some of the use cases that he's been looking at. I'll give a great example. If you're doing some kind of work on your property, and they always say call before you dig, because there's always a worry that if you're putting in a driveway or a sidewalk, you don't want to be cutting into. We lost it. There we go. You don't want to be cutting into a utility or electrical line, when you're doing any kind of groundwork within your property. So right now you call somebody up, they come out and they mark, they put yellow lines and orange lines, and they're spray painting your property so that where all the underground utility lines are. Where one of the things he's been looking at is if you can take all that information and you can put it in an AR application, so that a worker can go out there and they don't have to rely on a piece of paper trying to figure out exactly where you map that out. It gets a lot more complicated. I use the property example, but if you're building a parking lot, or you're changing something in a parking lot, or as we get towards smart cities and smart roadways, and you start having to dig things up, wouldn't it be great if you could have an AR application that is actually visualizing that to the people who are out there working? So, certainly, that a lot of like job aid type of things. If somebody has to work on a transformer on a telephone pole, rather than climbing up there, it'd be great if they could look at that with their AR glasses on and know exactly what model transformer it is, and what other hardware might actually be there. So those are a couple of the use cases that he's been looking at. But when you get into the utility space, utilities tend to be a very conservative industry. They don't change very quickly. They're not anxious to adopt the latest technology unless it's truly bulletproof, because they have a mission of being 99.999% reliable. They really don't want the power to go out, and that's their first mission. And they don't want to endanger that with what some of the folks in the procurement area of utility might perceive as an unproven technology. They want to know that it works beforehand. So that's a bit of the work that he's doing, is to look at the standards aspects. If a utility wants to buy a large amount of AR or even VR type of devices, they need to have a clear understanding of what their specifications are, and to be able to specify in a purchase requisition what they want. They have to be able to say it meets this, it meets that, and really the standards provide the basis of those requirements that would be used in the utility to enable those large purchases. So I went on that one a little bit more because I think that's some of the work that John's doing that's quite interesting, and we are working closely within the Standards Association along with the utility industry and also some large oil companies that are looking at AR applications for things like oil rigs, when you're out in a harsh environment, because the harsh environment aspect is another one that they tend to worry about, because this is all outdoor and needs to be very robust type equipment. The last item I'll touch on from this slide is the one that is down at the bottom. We have a large program that started up in the past year or so called the Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems. This is a very wide-ranging program that's going on within the Standards Association and now expanding across the entire IEEE with a number of other initiatives. And that's really looking at if you're designing products, what are some of the ethical considerations? I mean, the very simplistic case that people use is the autonomous vehicle, and how the autonomous vehicle makes a decision in a life-critical situation. Do you jeopardize the driver, or do you jeopardize a pedestrian who is out there? And how those decisions are made and the ethical considerations behind it. So there's a very large drive of work that's going on in that area right now, and it includes an aspect, it has, I think, close to 10 sub-working groups. One of those sub-working groups currently is addressing mixed reality and some of the considerations you need to have from ethical considerations around the use of VR and AR. So, that talks a little bit about some of the, I'll say, the emerging initiatives that are going on. There are quite a few things going on within standards themselves, where we've actually progressed from the emerging area right into actual standards work. There's a very active standard going on right now that is looking at augmented reality applications for learning, and how you would actually develop the architecture for learning using AR devices and AR systems. That one is, I'm going to say, it's probably within a year of publication of becoming an actual standard. There are numerous things that we're doing, say, in Internet of Things. There's an architecture document that is an actual standard, IEEE 2413. You get really lost in the numbers of IEEE standards. There are things going on, just about all over the place. I mentioned, some of the standards get proposed. In fact, I'll thank Yu Yuan right next to me. He's actually just successfully proposed 6 new augmented reality standards that were just recently approved for the start of work at our most recent meeting of the standards board within IEEE. So that should be very interesting as well. So, it's really a combination of trying to progress some of these emerging programs, emerging technologies, and have them progress towards new standards that are going to be beneficial to drive these new technologies along. But there really is no end to it. I was at one of the sessions yesterday afternoon, session 1 of the Digital Census Initiative, where one of the speakers had said that it's really unlimited, the number of areas that you could get into when it comes to VR and AR. It becomes unlimited from a standards aspect as well. You could look, while we think about the larger devices, you do need standards around all the subcomponents of devices. So whether it's the sensors, the communications aspects, and how are these things interoperating? If you have some AR, VR devices, you don't want them to be necessarily siloed. Maybe a company who's selling them would like them to be siloed. It's like Apple. You need to buy all Apple products to interconnect. But how do you get, if you're going to change up, if you're a large conglomerate, and I'll go back to the electric power industry, and John Simmons and I have had this discussion. If they're going to go out there and they're going to buy all these, they're going to make a massive investment in, say, AR headsets. First they have to think about the interoperability to their back-end office systems. They got to be pulling this data from somewhere. It's not just the cost of the devices themselves, it's the cost of the integration of those devices into their existing systems. They don't want to have a huge upcharge on developing all their other back office and the data sets that they have. So they need to make a good choice. They're going to buy these, say they pick vendor A who's selling these really great AR devices. What if 2 years from now somebody comes out with something that's 10 times better? Are they going to be able to ditch that whole aspect of it? And maybe they could afford to say, we're switching to another vendor who's got a better product that works better for us. But what's the interoperability cost? Are they going to have to reconfigure everything to be able to make a secondary device work as well? And that's really where standards tend to come in, to try to ensure interoperability, interchangeability, anything along those lines. I think one of the things we've heard more and more is that there needs to be a focus on the business case. We tend as engineers and technologists to think very often about all the cool gadgetry, the cool features that are involved. But at the end of the day, it always tends to be around the return on investment. If you're going to have a very large company make a very large commitment to any kind of mixed reality device, they will first ask about, what is my return on investment? You need to have that strong business case, and kind of being feature rich is great, but it also has to be affordable and make sense, and it has to show that it's going to be an incremental improvement over what they're doing today. So this is sort of back-ended, the way the slides were actually set up a little bit. I think everyone here is pretty familiar with IEEE, so I'm not going to get into that. But I think it is important to realize that I think a lot of the different areas of IEEE don't always, while there's tremendous work that goes on from a technological discussion standpoint, not everyone's truly aware of all the standards activities that go on. I think there was a very interesting graphic that the IEEE Standards Association president put up, where I think 80 or 90% of the standards that we develop actually come from only about 10% of the IEEE societies. And in some cases that makes sense because some of the societies are very specific and they're not necessarily standards focused. But we do like to highlight the fact that despite the fact that there are many standards organizations around the world, some of which are very targeted at specific industries, we do encourage folks to take advantage of the fact that you're doing work within the IEEE, and if you're looking at standardization, we hope that you'll consider IEEE as as the place to do standards work. Folks like Yuan and some of the others, who are here today very often sponsor a lot of the standards that we do. So the Consumer Electronics Society, we're very thankful that they sponsor a number of different standards programs that we do. And so we always like to highlight when we're talking to any society membership that that is an area that IEEE has a full service standards development organization. And we want people to be fully cognizant of that. When people are actually going through the formal standards development process, and when it comes to voting rights and things like that, we have two ways to do it. There's an individual method, which the majority of our standards are done where it's a one person, one vote. And there's also an entity where it's one company, one vote. And there's a nominal membership aspect to it that we have currently over 6,000 people who are registered as standards members, and close to 200 companies that also participate as company members as well. And the standards portfolio that we have is really an ever-changing, it's a very dynamic set of standards. If you look at that statistic on the left, there's over 1,000 different standards that are currently active from the IEEE. When it says 108 among which were approved, that's 108 new standards that were adopted for the start of work just in the past, in late 2016. So there's a good 10% turnover every year, and standards do take very often a couple years to come together, but it is it's a very dynamic aspect where it's a steady state churn of some standards being completed and new standards continuing to come on. But from that, we like to emphasize what we've been calling the full stack, or the larger life cycle of standards. And in order to keep that chain of standards coming in, there is the work that we do on incubation of new technology areas. The area that I'm involved with, we call it Industry Connections. Industry Connections is where groups get together. It's sort of a lightweight standards type of approach where groups operate sort of like a formal working group, but it's more of conversational. It's not really writing the standard. It's thinking about, again, roadmaps towards future standards. Sometimes it's just writing a white paper on what are the things that need to be accomplished to move a technology along. So our Industry Connections program is really part of that last step before somebody's ready to move towards standardization. And we run about close to 20 different groups across multiple technology areas. One of the groups, which I personally find very fascinating, is a group that is actually going to be presenting this afternoon, and that one is looking at 3D body scanning. And we've been getting tremendous interest out of large retailers. Target, has been involved, right down to startups, who are actually looking at body scanning for, kind of personalized information on, from clothing. But what's interesting is, as that program's been going for, I'll say about 6 to 9 months so far, we've all of a sudden been getting tremendous interest out of the medical community. And this is actually looking at, not body scanning with respect to, like you're getting an MRI or some kind of internal hospital diagnostic. This is looking at physical attributes. So we're seeing growth in that area from say health clubs, for example. They want to show how people can progress their development of using the health club. So you can actually see before and after pictures of how things would work there. But it's really been the retailers and the clothing manufacturers who've been very interested on the potential cost savings when it comes not only to not only to customer satisfaction of finding the things that you like, but also there's a tremendous amount of cost to retailers and the clothing manufacturers in terms of returns. People buy things on Amazon and they have you can ship it back for free if it doesn't fit. So there's a tremendous cost involved with the shipping of things back and forth, restocking and whatnot. So this 3D body scanning is really a very neat initiative in terms of changing the whole retail experience. And we'll have a really good group talking about that this afternoon, getting into some of the details from both a technology and a retailer perspective. So that and some of the other emerging areas that I've mentioned are areas that we always try to look at on the front end of standards. But there's also the back end. So somebody actually produces a standard, and then what do you do with it? We actually put together a number of workshops that are really looking at implementation of a standard once it's completed. And we've also got what we call the IEEE Conformity Assessment Program, which helps groups put together programs to see if you, quote unquote, meet the standard or how you conform to the standard. Some people look at certifying that they've met the standard. So that's somewhat of a back-end aspect that we have to how we support the standards that we do. And then finally, we also work quite a bit with alliance management. A number of different alliances are not necessarily IEEE standards, but groups that write specifications. So IEEE has this whole suite of alliance management services that it provides, and very often those do eventually get adopted within the IEEE as well. And I mentioned a lot of educational activities that we do, both standalone from our what we call our Standards University, which you can find information online, kind of online courses about standards and details of them, as well as working with the IEEE educational activities area, where we couple closely with them to try to also help people to understand how to use the standards best. So truly a full stack, looking from pre-standards to post-standards. While the emphasis tends to be around the formal standards development and some of the our higher profile standards, like again the IEEE 802 wireless, there's a tremendous range of different things that you can use the Standards Association to help again in terms of accelerating and promoting the technologies that they're working within. So with that, I'll conclude. I am not Alpesh Shah. Alpesh sadly couldn't join us today. I hope I did an adequate job in the interim, and I guess we'll take questions at the end. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dick.
Panasonic.